Where were you when Gene Tierney was getting gruesomely abused and everyone stood by doing nothing? Gene stopped at a popular club in LA and was dancing on the main floor, but little did poor Gene know this night would leave her severely disturbed and suffering in immense lifelong agony. She would regret ever stepping a foot inside the club on that cruel, dreadful night. This vile incident went beyond just the nightclub. Gene was disgustingly exploited by three men. When she came to consciousness, Gene let out an ear-piercing scream when she realized she was trapped in a room with three demented sociopaths, like a bird stuck in a cage. If you want to know the fate of Gene Tierney and how modern-day nightclub laws were mandated because of this inconceivable incident, listen in. The three hyenas stalked her as Gene was swinging her hips in a Hollywood nightclub without a care in the world, like the way a starving wolf tracks and stalks its prey. They noticed that she was all alone, which was typical for Gene since she never feared life in the spotlight. The three men slowly slithered their way towards her, taking drastic measures not to raise any suspicion. Once they were done weaving through the crowd, they finally reached her. Two of the men kept looking out for any bystanders, while the most experienced one approached Gene. He proceeded to get her guard down with his silver tongue, even though Gene rejected his advances. The damage had already been done since he had slipped deadly illicit substances into her cocktail the moment they met. This was only the beginning of the unending nightmare for Gene. Let me tell you what happened next. Gene walked up to the bar to top up her drinks. Suddenly, her vision started getting blurry, and it was becoming impossible to stay on her feet. These hyenas noticed the sudden change in Gene's body language, sickeningly smiling to one another, as this was the moment the deadly substances were working over the innocent girl. They patiently waited a few more minutes and caught her as she started losing control and passing out. Gene was completely unaware of the situation, since she was completely overwhelmed by the lethal substances flooding her system. In Gene's dazed state, she was completely incapable of communicating. The vultures instantly took advantage of her delicate state. These wolves in sheep's clothing deceitfully claimed to be a part of Gene's acting team. They conspired amongst each other, making up the story in which Gene was stumbling like a penguin after having one too many that night. However, we know the truth of the horrors which happened that night. One of the animals swiftly swung the petite Gene over his shoulder, while the other two hurriedly cleared the path for them to the nightclub exit. Recklessly, they shoved Gene in the eerie cargo bay of their van. They slammed on the gas, Gene their prize in their possession, and darted off for the motel they had arranged beforehand. Upon arriving, they threw Gene on a moldy bed. Once the unconscious Gene finally came to her senses, she had lost her mind. Gene started erratically kicking and screaming for rescue. In her desperate bid to break free from the nightmarish ordeal, she went to extreme lengths, frantically reaching out to any possible rescuer within earshot, praying for a glimmer of sanity amid the chaos. Sadly, there was absolutely no one coming for the rescue, only these sick vultures. They taped Gene's mouth shut while locking the door in order to make any plans of escape obsolete. If you want to find out how the motel owner was forced to unalive himself after this heinous incident, and if any lawful justice was served to Gene as well as these maniacs, pay close attention. To make sure that they were not interrupted or discovered, the three men bribed the selfish motel owner to shut down the building temporarily. During this period, the motel owner adamantly refused to take all guests in immense panic that the public would stumble across the gruesome scene. However, the sick owner immediately lost all control of his pathetic lust. Upon hearing the blood-curdling screams of Gene, he was bouncing like a rabbit at the idea of having a piece of Gene. He sprinted towards the room where they were keeping Gene enslaved. His hands trembling in excitement, he used his master key to unlock the room. His eyes bulged, widening, the dopamine rushing his brain at the sight of Gene's soft skin restrained to the bed. The three men were startled at the sight of the owner, almost drawing their firearms on him, but swiftly the room calmed down once they came to their senses and realized it was the owner. The owner rabidly praised them for their imprisoning of Gene Tierney, and to the disbelief of everyone in the room, he asked if he could partake in destroying Gene. The owner was throbbing with euphoria, finally having his disgusting way with Gene. He had an extremely disturbing obsession with her from a young age, and watched all her movies on constant repeat. The reason behind his sick motives goes back to the day when he tried to get an autograph from Gene, but his unsettling and disturbing demeanor meant he was turned down by the actress. Thinking back to that embarrassing memory, he desperately wanted revenge. In a blind rage, he launched a vicious, lustful assault on Gene, leaving her broken and traumatized. Now that we have reached the climax of our story, we will go over the fate of the three men, the twisted motel owner and the innocent Gene Tierney. After many hours of using Gene like a doll, they discarded her like trash and left her in the room. All of the men left and went back to their lives as if nothing ever had happened. The three criminals never faced any justice at the time and even abused more women. The motel owner even saw a boost in business revenue and set up hidden cameras in female guests' rooms to feed his uncontrollable desires. After all the suffering and lack of justice, Gene Tierney remained resilient and went on to have a fully successful acting career in Hollywood. Many years later, the horrific case was finally reopened. It was initially dismissed by the police due to improper handling of evidence. The news of Gene's unrelenting assault that night went public, ensuing an all-out witch hunt for the motel owner as well as the three criminals. Due to the hate and constant unaliving threats he was receiving, it pushed him into a deep, dark spiral of depression. His business went bankrupt, since no one wanted to stay at the motel where the owner supported, in addition to funding the violation of countless innocent women over the years. All of these aspects combined were too much for him to handle, leading to his neighbors discovering his body in his apartment after he unalived himself. As for the remaining three criminals, the court ruling held that they be sentenced to life in prison for assaulting and kidnapping an innocent woman. They will never taste freedom ever again. All of their assets, vehicles, and real estate were seized by law enforcement, meaning hardships would soon follow their families since they were dependent on them. Gene Tierney, despite recovering in her later years, never fully forgot about the events that took place that horrific night. She later went on to become a key figure in women's rights in the Hollywood film industry. She became an iconic golden-era girl despite all of the seemingly insurmountable obstacles life threw at her. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and follow for more. We appreciate all the feedback that helps the channel grow. See you on the next one on Insightful Times.